It was a warm Saturday afternoon in June when I first heard the frantic knocking at my door. I'd been living in the Oakwood apartments for just over 6 months, long enough to recognize most of my neighbors by sight, but not quite long enough to know many of them by name. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with the guy from apartment 3B, the one with the kind eyes and the vintage band t-shirts who always smiled at me in the elevator but rarely said more than a quick hello. Today, though, his face was flushed with panic, his eyes wide with worry. "I'm so sorry to bother you," he said, running his hand through his dark curly hair. "But my cat got out, and I think she went under the deck behind the building. I've tried calling her, but she won't come, and I can't reach her on my own. Would you mind helping me?" I didn't even hesitate before agreeing. Something about the genuine distress in his voice touched me, and besides, I'd always been a sucker for animals in need. As we hurried down the 3 flights of stairs to the back of our building, he introduced himself properly as Elijah and explained that his cat, Minerva, was a rescue who had been with him for 5 years. "She's never been outside before," he explained, his voice tight with worry. "She's always been an indoor cat, and she's terrified of loud noises. There was a delivery truck backfiring in the parking lot, and she just bolted when I opened the door to get my mail." Our apartment complex sat nestled between 2 small parks in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The buildings themselves were 3-story brick structures with wooden decks extending from the first-floor apartments out toward a shared grassy area. The deck behind our building was old and weathered, with narrow gaps between the boards that allowed just enough light to filter through to the space beneath, a space that was now apparently harboring one very frightened feline. As we approached the deck, Elijah filled me in on Minerva's personality. She was a small tortoiseshell cat with striking amber eyes and what Elijah described as more attitude than should be possible in a 10-pound package. She was skittish around strangers, but fiercely loyal to Elijah. The way his voice softened when he talked about her made it clear how much she meant to him. "She's been with me through everything," he said, kneeling down to peer into the darkness beneath the deck. "My coming out to my parents, my first serious breakup, changing careers, she's my constant." I nodded, understanding completely the bond between a person and their pet. I'd grown up with dogs and had been considering adopting a cat myself since moving to the apartment. As we both got down on our hands and knees to look under the deck, I could see just how much this rescue mission meant to Elijah. The urgency of the situation became even clearer when Elijah explained that Minerva had a minor heart condition that required medication twice daily. "She's due for her evening dose in a couple of hours," he said, his voice tight with concern. "Plus, she's never been outside before. She must be terrified." I could see the genuine distress in his eyes, and it moved me. There's something incredibly endearing about someone who cares so deeply for another living being. Without a second thought, I committed fully to the rescue mission. "We'll find her," I promised, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. Elijah seemed relieved to have someone helping him, and as we strategized our approach, I noticed the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. "Thank you for this," he said quietly. "Most people would think I'm overreacting about a cat. She's not just a cat though, is she?" I replied, understanding completely. "She's family." The smile he gave me in that moment, grateful, surprised, and warm, made something flutter in my chest. But there wasn't time to dwell on that feeling. We had a cat to rescue. We quickly gathered supplies from our respective apartments. I brought a flashlight and some work gloves, while Elijah returned with Minerva's favorite treats, a toy that made a distinctive crinkle sound she apparently loved, and his phone with the flashlight app ready. As we reconvened at the deck, we shared a moment of nervous laughter when we both realized we'd need to crawl into the tight, dark space beneath the wooden structure. "I haven't crawled under anything since I was about 10, I admitted, eyeing the narrow opening skeptically. "I did it once last year when I dropped my keys through a grate," Elijah offered. "But there was significantly more room and significantly fewer spiders involved." That made us both laugh again, a welcome release of tension before the task ahead. It was strange how quickly we fell into an easy rapport, the kind that usually takes weeks or months to develop. Maybe it was the shared purpose, or maybe it was something else entirely, something I wasn't quite ready to examine too closely. The space beneath the deck was about 2 feet high at its tallest point, gradually sloping down to less than a foot where it met the building's foundation. The ground was dirt mixed with gravel, and the whole area smelled of damp earth and old wood. As we prepared to enter this uninviting space, Elijah called Minerva's name one more time, his voice gentle and coaxing. We both held our breath, hoping for a meow in response, but were met with silence. "She's definitely under there," Elijah sighed. "I saw her dart under about 20 minutes ago, and I've been watching the whole time. She hasn't come out." We decided I would enter from one side of the deck, while Elijah went in from the opposite end, hopefully encouraging Minerva to move toward one of us. Before crawling in, we exchanged phone numbers, just in case we needed to communicate once we were under there. It was a practical decision, but there was something oddly intimate about the moment our phones touched as we shared contacts. "Ready?" Elijah asked, his eyes meeting mine. I nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of nerves in my stomach. "Let's go find your girl." The space beneath the deck was even more cramped than it had appeared from the outside. I had to flatten myself almost completely against the ground to shimmy forward, using my elbows to pull myself along inch by inch. The beam from my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating cobwebs and the occasional scurrying insect. I tried not to think about what might be crawling over my hands or through my hair as I moved deeper into the space. "Do you see anything?" Elijah's voice called from the other side, slightly muffled by the distance and the wooden boards above us. "Not yet," I called back, sweeping my flashlight in a slow arc, "just dirt and spiders so far." "Keep talking," he suggested. "Maybe your voice will help her realize you're not a threat." So I started talking, about nothing and everything. I told Minerva about my day, about the book I was reading, about how her human clearly adored her and was worried sick. As I spoke, I continued to inch forward, the space growing tighter as I moved deeper under the deck. "I had a cat when I was a kid," I found myself saying, my voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "His name was Gatsby, and he used to hide under my bed whenever anyone visited. It would take hours to coax him out sometimes." "Is Minerva like that too, Elijah?" "Only with strangers," Elijah replied, his voice closer now. "With me, she's practically a shadow. Follows me everywhere, even to the bathroom. It drives my ex crazy when he would visit." That casual mention of an ex, a male ex, sent an unexpected thrill through me. I'd been attracted to Elijah from our first elevator encounter, but had never allowed myself to hope he might be interested in men too. Now wasn't the time to dwell on that revelation, though. We had a rescue mission to complete. As I continued to edge forward, my flashlight beam finally caught a reflection, two small amber eyes glowing in the darkness. "Elijah," I whispered urgently, "I think I see her." About 10 feet ahead of me, near the center support beam. I heard him shifting position, trying to move toward where I'd spotted his cat. "Can you see if she looks okay?" The worry in his voice was palpable. I directed my flashlight more fully toward the spot where I'd seen the eyes, and sure enough, there was Minerva, a small tortoiseshell cat with distinctive orange and black markings, pressed flat against the ground, her ears flattened against her head in fear. "She looks physically fine," I reported, relief evident in my voice. "Scared, but not hurt from what I can see." The sound of my voice seemed to startle Minerva, and she shifted slightly, moving deeper into the shadows. My heart sank as I realized she was retreating further from both of us. "She's moving away," I said, trying to keep the disappointment from my voice. "Do you have those treats handy?" "Yes," Elijah replied, and I could hear the rustle of a package. "Here, I'm going to try to get closer to your position. If we can surround her, maybe one of us can reach her." The next few minutes involved a careful, awkward dance as we both tried to maneuver through the cramped space toward Minerva's hiding spot. The dirt beneath us was damp in places, and I could feel it soaking through my clothes. Cobwebs clung to my hair, and at one point, something that felt suspiciously like a spider crawled across my hand. I bit back a yelp, not wanting to frighten Minerva further. As we closed in on her position, I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. The space seemed to grow smaller, the air thicker and harder to breathe. I'd never considered myself claustrophobic before, but there was something about being trapped under the deck, surrounded by darkness and dirt, that made panic start to rise in my chest. "Are you okay?" Elijah's voice came from just a few feet away now, concern evident in his tone. "Just a little claustrophobic, apparently," I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll be fine. Let's just get Minerva and get out of here." "We're close," he encouraged. I can see her now, too. Look, we're going to get through this together, okay? Just focus on my voice. There was something so reassuring about his words, about the steady confidence in his tone. I took a deep breath and pushed the panic down, focusing instead on the task at hand. Okay, I think I have a plan, I said after a moment. If you can shake the treat bag to distract her, I might be able to reach her from this angle. Elijah agreed, and on the count of 3, he began to shake the bag of treats while making a soft clicking sound with his tongue. Minerva's head turned toward the familiar sound, her ears perking up slightly despite her fear. In that moment of distraction, I inched forward and reached out slowly, my fingers just brushing against her fur. She startled at the contact, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought she might bolt again. But instead, she froze, her whole body tense beneath my touch. "It's okay, sweet girl," I murmured, keeping my voice low and soothing. "Your dad is right here, and he's worried about you. We just want to get you home safe." Slowly, so slowly it felt like time itself had stretched, I moved my hand to cup her small body. She was trembling, her heart racing so fast I could feel it against my palm. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. My own heart was racing too, though from a mixture of adrenaline, confined spaces, and the strange intimacy of this shared rescue mission. "I've got her," I whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "But I'm not sure I can back out while holding her. She might panic. Can you pass her to me?" Elijah suggested. "I'm a little closer to the edge on this side." Carefully, inch by painstaking inch, I maneuvered toward Elijah's voice, cradling Minerva against my chest. She remained surprisingly still, perhaps too frightened to struggle, or perhaps sensing that we were trying to help. When I finally saw Elijah's face in the dim light, his expression of hope and gratitude made something warm bloom in my chest. Our hands met in the darkness as I carefully transferred Minerva to her owner's arms. Our fingers brushed, lingered for just a moment longer than necessary. Even in the dim light, I could see the emotion in Elijah's eyes, relief, gratitude, and something else I couldn't quite name. "Thank you," he whispered, the words carrying more weight than their simplicity suggested. With Minerva securely in Elijah's arms, we began the awkward process of backing out from under the deck. It was no easier going backward than it had been going forward, and by the time we both emerged into the late afternoon sunlight, we were filthy, covered in dirt, cobwebs, and who knows what else. But none of that mattered when I saw the look on Elijah's face as he held Minerva close, murmuring soft reassurances to her. The cat had stopped trembling and was now pressed against his chest, her eyes closed in what looked like relief. "We did it," I said, brushing dirt from my clothes in a futile gesture. "We did," Elijah agreed, his smile so bright it seemed to outshine the setting sun. "I can't thank you enough. Truly." Standing there in the fading light, dirty and disheveled but triumphant, I felt a connection with this man I barely knew, a connection forged through shared purpose and mutual aid. There's something powerful about helping someone in a moment of need, about seeing the vulnerability and gratitude that follows. "Let me at least make you dinner," Elijah offered as we walked back toward the building. "As a thank you. Once we've both had a chance to clean up, of course." I smiled, suddenly very aware of how I must look and smell after our adventure beneath the deck. "Dinner sounds great. I'm in apartment 2C when you're ready." As we parted ways in the hallway, Elijah paused, Minerva still cradled protectively in his arms. "I mean it, you know. Thank you. Not everyone would crawl under a dirty deck for a stranger's cat." "Maybe we're not strangers anymore," I suggested, surprising myself with my boldness. The smile that spread across his face made my heart skip. "No," he agreed softly. "I guess we're not." 2 hours later, showered and changed into clean clothes, I opened my door to find Elijah standing there with a bottle of wine and the ingredients for dinner. Minerva, he explained, was safely ensconced in his apartment, having been given her medication and a special treat for surviving her outdoor adventure. As we cooked together in my small kitchen, the conversation flowed as easily as if we'd known each other for years instead of hours. We discovered shared interests in obscure indie bands and classic films, a mutual love of spicy food, and the fact that we'd both grown up in small towns before moving to the city for work. The tension that had sparked between us beneath the deck hadn't dissipated with the danger. If anything, it had grown stronger in the comfortable safety of my apartment. Over pasta and wine, Elijah told me more about Minerva, how he'd found her as a kitten, abandoned near his previous apartment building, how she'd been so small she fit in his palm, how he'd stayed up all night with her when she developed her heart condition 2 years ago, terrified he might lose her. She's been my constant companion through some really tough times, he admitted, his voice soft with affection. Coming out to my parents didn't go well initially, and Minerva was there for all the tears and anger. My first serious boyfriend and I broke up after 3 years, and she slept on my chest every night for weeks afterward. She's not just a pet, you know. I do know, I assured him, touched by his openness. That bond is special. It's family. He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing something new. Most people don't get it. They think it's silly to be so attached to an animal. Most people haven't experienced that kind of unconditional love, I replied. It's their loss. The evening stretched on, one glass of wine turning into two, conversation flowing from pets to families to careers to dreams. We moved from the kitchen table to the couch, the space between us gradually shrinking as the night progressed. There was an ease between us that defied our short acquaintance, a comfort that felt both novel and familiar at once. When Elijah finally said he should check on Minerva, it was well past midnight. At my door, he paused, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "I'm really glad Minerva chose your side of the deck to hide near," he said softly. "Me too," I replied, meaning it more than I could express. He hesitated for a moment, then leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to my cheek. "Good night," he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. "And thank you again for everything." As I closed the door behind him, I touched my fingers to the spot where his lips had been, a smile spreading across my face. Who would have thought that a cat rescue mission would be the start of something so promising? In the days that followed, Elijah and I found countless reasons to spend time together. He invited me over to check on Minerva's recovery, though the cat seemed perfectly fine, lounging regally on his couch and regarding me with what I chose to interpret as approval. I asked him to help me pick out plants for my balcony, which somehow turned into an entire day exploring the local botanical garden. We discovered a shared love of terrible sci-fi movies and began a weekly tradition of takeout and film criticism that often ended with us talking until the early hours of the morning. Each encounter deepened our connection, revealing new layers of compatibility and understanding. I learned that Elijah was passionate about his work as a graphic designer, that he volunteered at an LGBTQ+ youth center on weekends, that he could make incredible chocolate chip cookies but couldn't boil an egg to save his life. He discovered my collection of vintage vinyl records, my terrible singing voice that didn't stop me from belting out songs in the shower, my habit of reading the last page of a book first. 3 weeks after our adventure beneath the deck, we were sitting on his balcony, watching the sunset with Minerva curled contentedly between us. The conversation had drifted to past relationships, and I found myself opening up about my last boyfriend, how we drifted apart gradually until we barely recognized each other. "I think that's what scares me most," I admitted, swirling the wine in my glass. "Not the dramatic breakups, but the slow fade, where you wake up one day next to someone who feels like a stranger." Elijah nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been there. My ex and we were together for 3 years, but I think we stopped really seeing each other after the first year. We just kept going through the motions because it was comfortable, familiar." "What finally ended it?" I asked, curious about this part of his past. He smiled ruefully. "Believe it or not, it was Minerva who made me face the truth. My ex was allergic to cats but took medication so we could be together. One day he just said he was tired of the medication, tired of compromising, tired of pretending he wanted the same things I did. And I realized I was tired too, just in different ways." As he spoke, Minerva stretched and moved to his lap, as if sensing she was the topic of conversation. He stroked her fur absently, his eyes meeting mine across the small space between us. "I promised myself after that I wouldn't settle again," he said quietly. "That I'd wait for someone who made me feel alive, not just comfortable. Someone who would crawl under a deck to help rescue a cat they'd never even met." The implication of his words hung in the air between us, charged with possibility. My heart hammered in my chest as I set my wine glass down and shifted closer to him on the balcony bench. "And have you found that someone?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering with words, Elijah leaned forward, his hand coming up to cup my cheek. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. When I responded, leaning into him and sliding my fingers into his hair, it deepened into something more urgent, more certain. Minerva, disgruntled at being dislodged from her comfortable position, jumped down with an indignant meow that made us both laugh, breaking the kiss, but not the moment. "I think I have," Elijah finally answered, his forehead resting against mine, his smile so bright it rivaled the setting sun behind us. That night marked the beginning of something new between us, something that had been building since the moment we'd crawled beneath that deck together, hearts racing in tandem as we worked toward a common goal. In the weeks and months that followed, our relationship deepened and expanded, filling spaces in my life I hadn't even realized were empty. 6 months after the rescue, I moved into Elijah's apartment. Minerva adjusted to the change with surprising grace, claiming my lap almost as often as she claimed Elijah's. A year after that, we adopted a second cat, a shy orange tabby we named Gatsby, in honor of my childhood pet. The two cats formed an unlikely friendship, much like their humans had. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when we're all curled up together on the couch, 2 men and 2 cats in perfect, contented harmony, I think about that day beneath the deck, about how the universe works in mysterious ways, bringing people together through the most unexpected circumstances, about how sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a knock on the door and a request for help. And I'm grateful for nosy, escape-prone cats, for rickety old decks, for the courage to crawl into dark, unknown spaces, both literal and metaphorical. But mostly, I'm grateful for that moment when our hearts raced together in the darkness, beating in time to a rhythm that would eventually become the soundtrack of our shared life. Who would have thought that a simple act of kindness, a willingness to get dirty and uncomfortable to help a stranger, would lead to the kind of love that changes everything? That's the beauty of life, I suppose. You never know when crawling under a deck might lead you home. Total _char_count, 18,456.